What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now today I wanted to bring to you the top 10 cards of 2016. Now when I was making this video, and I'm only incorporating cards that were released in 2016, I was looking back at some of the cards that came out and realized that we had a lot of broken shit come out this year. And this list actually at one point was anywhere from 25 to 30 cards because there was actually that many contenders that could have been on this list. So it's really crazy to think that we've had so many powerful cards come out in 2016. So I wanted to give you my list of my top 10. This is a purely subjective list, so my opinion might be different from yours. So be sure to let me know down in the comments which cards you feel should or should not be on this list as well. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 10, which is Card of Demise. Now, Card of Demise obviously earned a spot on this list because it essentially brought back row heavy decks back into the forefront. Being able to potentially go +2, you dump your whole hand, you draw some cards, and then you get to dump your whole hand again, gives back row decks that extra boost that they needed to be able to compete in the competitive meta that they didn't previously have. You know, back row decks being a lot slower, being a lot better at playing the 1-for-1 game, but a lot of fast meta decks are pretty much able to just outpace that entirely because everything that they do is so much more unfair. So Card of Demise basically brought those decks back into the format, and while a lot of people might not like the fact that Card of Demise does that, it's something that I feel like can't be overlooked because without it, it's something that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have seen decks like Cosmo Demise, Satellar Demise. There's so many different Demise variants that have come out in the past year that it definitely deserves a spot on the top 10. Now moving on to number 9, we have Solemn Strike. Now Solemn Strike, being this low on the list, I mean, that pretty much goes to show how many good cards came out this year, but I feel like Solemn Strike is just one of those cards that we have a card like Black Horde of Heaven from the previous couple of years, and we're like, oh, you know, we can't get a card better than this, and then fucking Solemn Strike comes out, not only being able to let us negate an inherent summon, but also being able to Divine Wrath and negate the effect of any monster, whether it be on the field, in the hand, in the graveyard, at a spell speed 3 is fucking crazy. The fact that this card's still at 3, a lot of people argue shouldn't be allowed, but Solemn Strike does a lot for the game. At the measly cost of 1,500 life points, it's really something that isn't too uncommon that you might see someone use 3 of in one single game, but it's a very powerful card. Its weaknesses are, though, that it is a trap, it is vulnerable to removal, but nonetheless, it still made a spot on this list. Now moving on to number 8, we have the infamous Twin Twisters. Now the second that Twin Twister came out in Breakers of Shadow, this immediately saw play in pretty much almost every single deck in existence, mainly because it replaced people's Mystical Space Typhoons, because not only are you able to remove 2 spell and traps instead of 1, but by discarding a card, usually the cost is mitigated by something that either triggers in graveyard or becomes a combo piece once it's in the graveyard, or people don't really care about discarding a card to 2-for-2 to removal, because then that means on their turn, they're able to just go completely off and pretty much win the game outright from there. It also means that you can wipe Pendulum Scales with 1 card, which is also really important, making Pendulum decks that much harder to recover for them moving forward. Twin Twister pretty much sees 2 to 3 copies of it every single deck now, whether it's main deck or side deck, so this card definitely deserves a spot on the 2016 list. Now moving on to number 7, we actually have a tie because I couldn't really figure out any other way to put both of these cards on the list unless they were put together. And those 2 cards are Cyber Dragon Infinity and Totally Awesome. Now the reason I put these 2 cards together is because they basically have the same effect, where they're essentially negating either a spell, trap, or monster effect. Now you do have different other effects, like Totally Awesome allowing you to set that card to your side of the field, and Cyber Dragon Infinity allowing you to absorb your opponent's monsters, which is fucking ridiculous. So they both have their own niche applications outside of the fact that they can pretty much act as a walking solemn judgment. But the reason that they're on this list is because as soon as both of these cards came out, they immediately saw play. Cyber Dragon Infinity seeing a lot of play with Satellar Knight Ptolemaeus, and Totally Awesome is still seeing tons of play in decks like Paleozoics and even Heroes, giving new dimensions to those decks. So I definitely feel like both of these cards have been terrorizing 2016 and definitely deserve the number 7 slot. So moving on to number 6, we have Utopia the Lightning. Came out in a manga, by the way, and Utopia the Lightning is one of those rank 4s that is pretty much going to go down in time as one of the best rank 4s. Well, it's not really a rank 4, but technically it is. But it's going to go down in history as one of the best rank 4s ever because it's an out to so many different cards, and it's something that the game really needed. You know, before this, we did have kaijus, which kaijus were an answer, but the problem with kaijus is they have to be drawn from your deck, and on top of that, they don't really do anything outside of solving problems other than problem monsters, where Utopia the Lightning has a lot more versatility in not only allowing you to deal with problem monsters, but you still have a monster on the board that's a sizable threat at 2,500. And being able to pump himself up to 5,000 and also having a built-in Armades effect is fucking crazy, and it's definitely something that any rank 4 deck loves. It was an answer to Cosmos, it was an answer to Apocalypse Towers before it was banned. There's just so many things that we had an outcry for, that we needed a card like Utopia the Lightning, and it's just so much better than kaijus because it is in your extra deck. Even though it's limited to rank 4 base decks, it's just a proactive way to deal with those problem cards rather than reactive with a kaiju. So, moving on to number 5, we actually have another tie, and it actually is going to be Aether the Heavenly Monarch and Pantheism of the Monarchs. Now, the reason we have another tie is because, again, I was trying to isolate which one of these two cards essentially brought Monarchs into the power position that they were for such a long time. And I really couldn't think of, between the two, they're both incredibly powerful, so again, I just decided to put them together. They're both limited on the Forbidden list now, if that tells you anything about how powerful these cards are. Aether's ability to just summon another Monarch, so it has very strong offensive capabilities, but then also defensive capabilities with Karaz, and then the fact that you can use it on your opponent's turn, and it's not it's just, there's so many good things that Aether has going for it that it's just absolutely fucking crazy. And then Pantheism of the Monarchs, arguably one of the best draw spells ever created in the game. Not only does it act as a trade-in for a deck that runs like 20 different targets for it, so it's super consistent, but then it's also a +1, pretty much tutoring any Monarch spell or trap in your deck if you play the card correctly. So, as you can see, it was really difficult to pick between the two which one was better, so I decided to go ahead and give them the same slot. So moving on to number 4, we have another tie, and just for the same reasons as we've had ties before. This time we have ABC Dragon Buster and Union Hanger. So Dragon Buster has pretty much been destroying the format as soon as it came out in the Kaiba structure deck. It's one of the easiest boss monsters we've ever had to summon. It's one of the hardest boss monsters to deal with, and in tandem with a card like Union Hanger, which is essentially a +2 on activation and a concurrent +1 every single passing turn it stays up, it's arguably one of the best field spells in the game. And the two cards together are just incredibly powerful, and until something is done about them on the ban list, you're going to see both of these cards around for a very, very long time. Now moving on to number 3, we have PERFORMAPAL Pendulum Sorcerer. Yes, this card did come out in Breakers of Shadow, which was the first set to come out in 2016. And it's really crazy to think that it's been that long, because this guy used to run anywhere from $90 to higher because of its capability. It was essentially like a +2 because you're popping your pendulum scales, getting 2 more pendulum scales, usually get Turtle and Lizard Draw, and then you would pendulum summon out the 2 cards you just destroyed alongside with himself, and he just did such crazy shenanigans for the pendulum deck that he definitely warranted the price tag that he used to have. Now, obviously the pendulum decks have come and gone, mainly because they've taken lots of severe hits on the ban list, but that doesn't mean that this card doesn't deserve a spot on the list, because it's done so much for the game and has terrorized so many players since its existence then it's definitely deserving of the number 3 slot. Now, number 2 might come as a surprise to a lot of you, granted how much I've talked up this card, but the number 2 slot is Pot of Desires. Now, the reason that it's number 2 is it really should not have, there's really no justification, because Pot of Desires is pretty much an auto staple 3 of in almost every single deck as soon as it came out in the Dark Illusion. Banishing 10 cards, a lot of people came to realize, really doesn't mean anything if you're going to get a +1 and potentially win the game, because you're not going to go through your entire deck of 40 cards anyway, and as long as you don't banish very, very key combo pieces, then you're totally fine. And Pot of Desires is just still proving with its $70 to $80 price tag that there's a high demand for a card, and people are willing to go the extra mile for that +1. Now, for number 1 on the list, I actually again forgot that this card came out because it is a Breakers of Shadow card. And number 1 of 2016 is PERFORMAPAL MONKEYBOARD. Now, this should come as no surprise because PERFORMAPAL MONKEYBOARD is currently on the ban list. It got the axe earlier this year because people realize that a 1-card pendulum scale that is searchable is a little bit too fucking good. So that's why this card basically ate the dust. It made PERFORMAPAL and Pendulum deck just over the top. Like, you thought Pendulum Sorcerer was powerful, this card pretty much just took it over the edge. And the fact that this card at one point was at 3 for a very, very short time made full power Pepe possible, but immediately went to limited to prevent that from happening, and from us pretty much getting a tier 0 format. But even at 1, PERFORMAPAL MONKEYBOARD continued to dominate the format with Pendulum decks, and so it finally met its fate and went to 0. You know, there's something about just, there's no other card really in the game that can really just complete a Pendulum scale in a deck that's just that powerful. And personally, I feel like it's a card that definitely needed to go for that reason. So that's going to do it, guys, for my top 10 list. Let me know again down in the comments what you guys think. If there's any cards you think I missed or any cards that would be on your top 10 list, I would love to hear it. And one quick announcement as well, tomorrow is the last day of the year, so that's the last time to get in your questions for the monthly December Q&A. So I'm going to put the video up here. Post your questions in the comments of that video if you want them to be answered in tomorrow's video. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because just by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to bring you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content 4 to 5 times a week. So thank you guys so much again. We'll see you next time.